of some advanced cloud misconfiguration exploits. So at Fugue, we believe that developers own the security and compliance of your cloud infrastructure. It's not a separate concern that the security team or a compliance team can really kind of take on separately from what you're doing. You're building it, you're modifying it, you kind of own the security of it. But there's some good news there, because the cloud is 100% software. And it really, cloud security really is a software engineering problem to be addressed, not kind of a traditional security analysis problem that can be successfully addressed that way. So we developed Fugue to empower you to keep your cloud secure and enable you to move fast without all the headaches that usually come with kind of security and compliance. Fugue is a SaaS application. It captures the full configuration state of your cloud environment rather than just kind of looking for specific predefined problems. But it captures that configuration state now as it currently is and over time. So you can kind of see the full picture of your cloud and your security posture as it changes and with every change. So in addition to having all that configuration data available to you for audit purposes or what have you, Fugue takes that information and builds kind of a dynamic model of your cloud and creates visual diagrams for you of your environment so you can actually see what you have running, drill into configuration details, policy violations, etc., and also kind of understand the relationship between your cloud resources. Helps you kind of identify things that might not be readily sort of visual or visible when you're kind of looking at lists of resources, things like orphaned infrastructure. Oftentimes when one of our customers first generates one of these visual diagrams of their environment, they're like, wait, what is that stuff over there? That's not supposed to be there. Might not be tagged properly or what have you. So those visual diagrams can be really useful for a number of purposes. When you first run Fugue, you can choose to validate your environment against any number of different compliance controls that we offer out of the box: CIS, NIST, SOC 2, etc., as well as your own custom enterprise policies. Fugue will show you any violations that you have, give you information on what you need to do to remediate them, and you can easily kind of create compliance reports that'll get generated on your schedule and distributed to everybody that needs those. One of the cool things that we've been working on is kind of applying Open Policy Agent, or OPA. You may have heard of it if you're involved in the Kubernetes community. It's a really cool, really powerful and flexible open standard for policy as code. That's what Fugue uses for our custom policies. It's really easy to learn, and you can create policies for pretty much just anything that you have running in your cloud, and validate what you have running. In addition, we recently created an open sourced Regula, which uses OPA to run policy checks on Terraform. So now you can kind of find out if you have some issues in your Terraform code before you even go to build your infrastructure. Fugue Developer is our free plan for individual engineers. So just go to fugue.co/go to get started. It takes about 15 minutes to get up and running with Fugue and kind of get a full picture of your cloud environment and kind of a compliance picture as well. And finally, and since I'm about to turn it over to Josh, we are about to launch a Cloud Security Masterclass series, which is going to be, I think, kind of like an unwebinar, if you will, or a series of unwebinars. They're going to be really kind of hands-on live video sessions where Josh is going to kind of take a deep dive into certain specific cloud security topics. The one we have coming up is May 28th at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 p.m. Pacific. That goes really deep into S3 security and how to go about building a highly secure S3 bucket. So hit us up. I'm Drew at fugue.co if you want to get on the list for that, because it's going to be a really cool session. So thanks again for having us out. We're super stoked about this, and I will go ahead and turn it over to you, Josh.
Okay, thank you, Drew. I'm going to stop sharing for 1 second because one thing we're going to do in this session is I'll have a series of backgrounds. Some of them will be from anime, some will be from gaming, some will be from the history of computing. So these are 3 things I love. And if you can tell us exactly what these backgrounds are, and you need to be as specific as possible, we understand everyone's missing their swag. So we're going to send you some really cool swag if you're the first one, as I have these different backgrounds up, to guess it. I have made mistakes replying to people in the past in chat. So Drew and Sivia are going to do that. But Drew and Sivia, check the chat because I think we instantly got a winner. Clearly, I'm going to have to go deeper into the vault. And we'll do a bunch of these. Okay, so, but if you win, stop answering, okay? Because the last time we did this, we had like one guy who watched all the same things I did, and he just kept, you know, telling people what they were. So don't do that. All right, I'm going to go back to screen share since we've got, I think, a winner.
Josh?
Yes.
I just wanted to say, yeah, to that end, you can only win once. So if you guess it once and you get it right, don't ruin it for other people. So I think we have a winner, Jay Makurari. I'm sorry if I massacred your name. Guess Neon Genesis Evangelion.
If anyone said Evangelion or Neon Genesis, it's the same thing. And yes,
Yep.
This is the control room from Neon Genesis Evangelion.
So,
okay, but back to some business. And we'll keep doing these, and they're going to be really pretty diverse across lots of different kinds of things in those genres. Okay, let's talk about the agenda. I am going to go through some slides. I'm sorry, but it's worth doing to really define what we mean by misconfiguration risk, because the hack I'm going to do is based on misconfigured cloud resources. So understanding that. Then most of this is going to be spent with me at the terminal and at the AWS console and at the Fugue console doing a real live hack. Feel free to jump in. If I'm distracted, jump into the chat and ask any questions. And if I'll either notice or Drew or Sivia will tell me will poke me to take a look. But you know, anytime you want, we want this to be highly interactive. And then finally, I'm going to go and we're going to talk about some steps that you can use to secure your cloud infrastructure from misconfiguration attacks. Okay, so what is cloud misconfiguration? Well, the first thing to understand about it is a major security risk. The quote on the left from Gartner, you know, nearly all successful attacks on cloud services are the result of customer misconfiguration, mismanagement, and mistakes. One, that's true. And 2, it sounds kind of accusatory. And I actually really hate it when somebody gets breached and it hits the press and the press are, you know, and the, you know, tech Twitter are all, you know, dissing them, oh, they're idiots or whatever. No, actually, most of the time, these breaches aren't what the press think they are first. They are usually more complex. And cloud misconfiguration is very hard to get your hands around. So I always just feel bad for folks. My background is a combination of building stuff in national security environments. Prior to founding Fugue, I was a principal SA at AWS for the DoD and some in other kinds of national security environments. And so I've been spending a lot of my career thinking about these things. And cloud is challenging. The good news is if you get it right, it's the most secure computing platform invented by humans to date. The bad thing is getting it right requires thinking quite differently and knowing new patterns and new things, and the bad guys are very good at that. So this 93% figure of concern for a major security breach due to misconfiguration is from a big survey we did back in, I think, 2018. This one, maybe it's early 2019. But anyway, when I'm showing you these stats, like this 93%, that's what the respondents to our survey said. And we were pretty careful about who we allowed to participate because we really wanted folks operating at scale on cloud. So in this case, it was over 300 organizations operating at scale on cloud. And most of them, the vast majority, 93%, were concerned for this. I would suggest that the 7% who aren't might be the ones in the news, because we all should be. Okay, what specifically were they concerned with? And by the way, this is going to relate directly to the hack, because I'm actually going to leverage 3 misconfigurations to do this hack. The first thing that folks said they were most concerned with was identity and access management. And I was surprised. I thought people would say like object storage, S3 buckets, but no, number 1, identity and access management. Man, that's spot on. This is very new compared to the data center. There is no equivalent in the data center. We're not talking about Active Directory in the traditional sense of like users. What we're talking about here with identity and access management is really an alternative network of resources in the cloud and grants of authorization as to whether they can talk to each other and what they can do with each other. So it is very complex, and I was very pleased to see that that was the number 1 issue folks were worried about. Still too low a number, should be 100%, but hey, 66 is better than I thought. Security group rules. So these are essentially ingress rules and trust relationships based on TCP/IP networks. I'm going to leverage I'm going to leverage a misconfigured security group in this hack. So, and by the way, this hack I'm doing, I'm not going to name any names, but it is based on a careful analysis of Department of Justice complaints and other information about a real world hack that happened not that long ago that was in the news. So as Drew pointed out, we at Fugue, what we do for a living is help you avoid these things and be secure. And the reason we do these analyses is because the traditional compliance frameworks like CIS and NIST and HIPAA, they don't really, they're way behind the bad guys. So the reason we do these analyses is because we build rules into our system, into our tool, that will tell you if you're vulnerable to what the bad guys are really doing out there. Number 3, object storage access policies. Again, I expected that would be number 1, but this is like, you know, the classic trope out there is, oh, it was an insecured S3 bucket. Very often it's not a classically insecure S3 bucket. So I'm going to show you how using misconfiguration of IAM and security groups, I can gain access to a properly configured S3 bucket and steal all the data. And then encryption and transit disabled. So the world has changed. We know we're all doing this stuff from home, right? And we did a survey this year, and we just happened to be doing it right when COVID really hit. And so we got to ask a few questions of folks about, you know, how much distributed work they're doing and how that impacts them. So what we found is in the post-COVID world of our survey respondents, again, these are organizations operating at scale on cloud, tech companies, enterprises, et cetera. 96% of their cloud engineering teams were 100% distributed. 83% of companies were transitioning to 100% distributed teams. And 84% of respondents were concerned about cloud security during that transition, because you know, in the kind of pre-COVID world or the non-distributed world, very often people are leveraging TCP/IP network-based perimeter defenses that just are become unfeasible when you're going totally distributed. I would argue that they were never very good anyway, and there's better ways to do this. So that might be the silver lining, at least from my perspective. Cloud misconfiguration is as we said, a big security risk. I thought this was an interesting set of data. Are you concerned that you've been hacked and don't know it? 84% are concerned. Again, I'm happy with how high that is. You know, we know from a lot of these breaches, the only reason the company that was breached ever found out about it was because somebody bragged on social media or their data started getting sold. In other words, none of their existing, you know, IDS, IPS, TCP/IP based typically defense mechanisms or log analysis mechanisms, none of those caught that their data had been stolen. And I'm going to explain as we go through the hack why That's probably true of almost everyone who's been hacked on cloud. Most people, vast majority, are concerned they're vulnerable to a major data breach. All of us need to be concerned about that. And in the next year, do you think cloud misconfiguration risk will increase or stay the same? 76% said increase. Totally agree with that as well, for lots of reasons. People are moving more stuff into cloud. There are always new cloud services. And when people integrate new cloud services, there are new attack patterns available and surfaces that the bad guys can leverage, and so on. So why is this so often overlooked? And it seems like, like a few years ago, people were like, hey, we at Fugue would tell people, cloud misconfiguration is a big deal. And say, really? No, I don't really buy that. It took a lot of these breaches and detailed explanations of them for people to start being concerned. So, and now you can see most people, the vast majority of people, are very worried about this. And it's because these things are often overlooked. And there's really good reasons for this. Again, I feel bad for the folks who get breached. Many, if not most, cloud misconfigurations are not recognized as misconfigurations by security teams. And the reason for that is that they're not considered policy violations by the compliance frameworks, because those compliance frameworks are still thinking in data center terms for the most part. So we at Fugue have a thing called Fugue Best Practices, where we bake all this stuff in that I'm going to be showing you. But if you're reliant on, CIS benchmark or NIST or HIPAA, bad guys can still break into your stuff and you probably won't know about it. So what that means is the security teams aren't aware of it because the compliance frameworks don't warn them about it. And that means these are exceedingly common in cloud environments. And what we just saw in the prior slides is, and everyone knows that. Okay. A little bit about hacker strategy. I'm being cued here to stop sharing for a second and come up with a new background to give away some swag. Let me do that. Let's see. We did anime. I'm not going to do another anime. All right. I'm going to go pretty far back in the day in the history of computing. I'm going to go further back in the day later, but pretty far back in the day. Oh, let's start with this one. So you need to tell us what kind of computer this is. Boom.
We got it.
All right. Yeah, I got it. Man, okay. I'm going to do one more right now. Maybe I can come up with one that somebody isn't going to immediately nail. No, it's not Windows. It's the Amiga. And in particular, this is Amiga DOS, I think 1.3. Amiga Shell Window. Yeah, I know Amiga Shell Window was a giveaway, but hey, you paid attention, you saw it. The name is in the picture. I know. Okay, I failed. Let's do another one.
And just to let you know, the person who won, if you've won before, so this one in the previous slide, you can't win again. So let everybody else get a shot at it, and we'll have some fun, and you'll get some Fugue swag.
Okay, this one's going further back in the day. Now, this computer is the very one that the first graphical video game was created on. I'm not going to tell you the name of it because you'll Google that and you'll immediately know. But we need to know the model of this computer. And this is going way back. Okay, we don't have an immediate hit on this one. I will give you some hints until we get a winner. This computer is actually, okay, someone said VAX. No, but you're on the right trail. You got to go further back. It's not a Xerox Alto, although it's a good guess because this little round screen here actually had a light pen. We're talking early 60s. All right, we got a winner. It is the famous Digital Equipment Corporation PDP-1. And by the way, since I know a lot of folks there, I'm on the East Coast, but if you're out in Silicon Valley or in the Bay Area, when things are open again, the Computer History Museum has this computer in it. And the guy, I'm not going to think of his name now because I'm terrible with names, but the actual programmer who wrote the very first graphical computer game, which was called Space War, sometimes will go there on the weekend and show you his game and answer questions. And it's a whole lot of fun. So, all right, I'm going to go back to sharing screen and we'll move on. Sylvia, I'm sorry that I'm giving away so much swag and making you mail so much stuff out, but that was
No,
just
that's
mailed
okay.
too quick.
That's just great. No worries.
Okay, cool. All right, we're back to slides. So how has hacker strategy evolved? Kind of in the old days, the dominant method for hacking somebody was to target an organization, right? Hollywood's full of this. But so was the real world, and it still happens. It's still out there. Recent-ish examples would include things like when Sony Pictures put out a movie that North Korea didn't like, and they targeted Sony. Another would be whoever it was that wrote Stuxnet to target the Iranian nuclear program. You pick the target organization, and then you start going after vulnerabilities. That still does happen, but that's not how most of these happen. That's not the thing you have to worry about most anymore. The thing you have to worry about most now is on the right here. And even some of the like big names that have been breached in recent years, this is how it was done. The bad guys now, within minutes or seconds of you putting a resource on the internet, have already scanned it with automated tools looking for misconfigurations and vulnerabilities. And they log those in a database. So if you look at like hackers talking on social media, they'll be talking about the list of vulnerabilities they found and who should they go after. Well, that's because they have automation that's cataloging all that. So you get up in the morning, if you're going to do some data theft and selling it on the dark web, or some Bitcoin mining on somebody else's dime, or both. Usually it's both these days, or whatever coin mining. Sorry, if there's noise in the background, I have a big giant dog behind me. I think he's heading out. Okay, so the bad guys are using automation to find anything you have misconfigured. Then they're looking up either through SSL certs or other means who it is, and now they have this nice list of people to go hack. So the bad actors are using this automation to find and exploit these misconfigurations. One friend of mine told me, who just does this all day long, not the hacking part, but cataloging them and researching them, that 7 minutes is average. I've seen even multiple times a second. So it's out there, they're hitting you. The cloud providers do a really good job of trying to watch for this and filter for it, but the bad guys are really clever, and it's an arms race, right? And defense is always harder than offense. All right, and that means that our security strategy has to evolve too. So before the cloud, the way we secured infrastructure was we had slow-moving infrastructure. Like this PDP-1 sat there operating probably for a decade, and they'd bring in new tape machines, right? Well, in the modern data center, that was, you would do a procurement cycle, you would design a network, you would probably have a whole team between operations, network, security, business units, et cetera, who were concerned with and involved in the design and securing of the system. So that's how it worked. And then the application developers would deploy stuff into these relatively static environments, like, recap cycle on a typical piece of, network gear is probably 5 years. On a compute, server or storage might be 3 or 5 years. So this stuff moved slow. And that friction allowed people to assert control. Like we thought it moved fast at the time. Guess what? It didn't move fast. It moved really slow. So we would use things. Also, the boundary was defined typically by the network with a certain number of ingress and egress points. And you kind of tried to make this defense in depth based on TCP IP, et cetera. So the network and security teams, ops teams, deliver the infrastructure to the app teams in the old days, and then network analysis and threat detection tools try to identify intrusions while they're going on by doing packet inspection and things like that. And then the response is human guided in the old days. But none of that's good on cloud. None of that works properly on cloud. You still want to do some of those things, but it's wholly inadequate to the problem space. And the reason is everything's been flipped on its head by cloud. Just this morning, I built what would in the old days have been a large scale corporate LAN by running one script. right? So developers, and by the way, my background is I'm a software architect, developer, going way, way back to the 80s, early 90s professionally. So in the modern world, developers can just summon infrastructure through API calls and configure it on the fly. And guess what? That means anything we don't know about security is getting built into these programs, and these programs are creating the infrastructure, and therefore those will be misconfigured infrastructure. So what we need to be focused on now are things like policy as code validation tools. Drew mentioned we use OPA, Open Policy Agent. It's awesome. There's a lot of work to getting it right. And then, so you need to check up front when you're writing your infrastructure as code, you're writing a Terraform template. You need to check that template to see if you can see any security issues in policy as code up front. That's nowhere near good enough, by the way, because once that template runs, there are all kinds of side effects these APIs have that introduce a lot of security vulnerabilities, things like default security groups when you create new infrastructure, et cetera. So you need to do that, but then you also need to have automated detection and automated remediation in the runtime environment. So the bad guys are automated and you need to automate, which means cloud security is actually a software engineering problem, not just a security analysis problem. Okay, it's time for me to do the tightrope. Sylvia, you just prompt me whenever you want me to do a background, but for now I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Oops.
Since you stopped sharing, a background about now would be good.
Okay, let's find another one. We're going to switch it up. Have we done any games? I don't
Not
think
yet.
so. You've got a clue. It's a game. When somebody gets it right away, I'll start dropping some clues. Boom.
Calvin.
All right, I clearly need to up my game here. All right, the correct answer is Final Fantasy VII. So kudos to Calvin. I think that was about 12 seconds. So, yep, need to up my game. Okay, I'm going to go back to screen share. Okay, somebody said put up something really tough to figure out. I have to have pre-selected these because I'm screen sharing now. Let me see if I've got something that's really tough. All right, depending on who you are, this may or may not be pretty darn tough. It has stumped people before. So we'll see who in the crowd. Somebody said war games. No, it is not war games. What we're looking for here is the name of this kind of computer. This is a real computer. No, I think it's not a Sun. Nope. It's not a Cray. No, I think Whopper was a Cray. AIX, nope. This is a company that only existed for a little while, and they were one of the first companies to make truly massively parallel computers. So all those little red LEDs, are actually showing if a processor is active. So these were like massively parallel. And one of the places you can see one of these, I've only seen one in the flesh. It's not a Next machine. Nope. Kind of looks like one there. It's a cube. Cray one, nope. Vax, nope. IBM, nope. One of the very few, Pyramid, nope. HP, nope. One of the very few places you can see one in the flesh and it's still running is at a really cool museum. I'm very much outing myself as a major computer history geek and I go to all these museums. Linux, nope, it is not. Is at the National Cryptologic Museum, which is near me at near Fort Meade, Maryland. CM2. I think that's the model name. Nishal, CM2. Yeah, it's a connection machine 2. Excellent. These things are super cool. The company didn't really, Thinking Machines Corporation, thank you. Yes, it is. And this thing was storage. This is back when computers had some swagger, man. This is a stylish beast. Eat a girl question. I don't know what that means. I'm just throwing up stuff that, you know, old computer stuff, gaming stuff, and anime stuff today. But Debbie, you know, let us know in chat the kinds of things you'd like to see. And next time we do one of these, I'll do more. But the National Cryptologic Museum is right next to the NSA. And they used to use these because of the massive parallelism of them to do whatever they did with it. Okay. I'm going to stop video because I'm going to start typing at the terminal, and I don't want to be worried about whatever goofy face I might be making while I'm typing. So we're now going to do a live no, but Alex, somebody said in the Q&A, answered to one of these paprika, and I think you're referring to the anime. It was not paprika, but wow, that's an awesome one. Okay, I'm now going to switch to the terminal. Now, if you're not used to typing at a terminal, don't worry about it. I'm going to explain every little thing that I'm going to do. If you're used to typing at a terminal, please forgive me all of my, oh, come on, Josh. Please forgive me my typos and so on. But before I start typing at the terminal, I'm going to show you using Fugue's visualizer what I'm going to do here. So this is a cloud infrastructure right here. We like to visualize things because that way you can really see what you're doing and understand what you've built in the cloud and so on. But just to explain this diagram a little bit, over on the left here is the internet. These are VPC networks here. This is the default VPC. This is the one I'm going to use today. Here I've got a compute instance, and this particular one is an EC2 instance, but it could just as easily be a container. And what we very often see when people get breached is it starts, the foot in the door is due to a piece of infrastructure folks forgot about. We call it zombie infrastructure or orphan infrastructure. So this one I have conveniently named, I've got a CVE, a common known vulnerability. That's what you want to avoid, right? Is a compute instance of any variety, container or VM or whatever, that gets forgotten about, that ends up with vulnerabilities, that is exposed through a overly permissive security group. You can see here this maintenance security group is lit red in Fugue because we've said, hey, that has dangerous configuration. And once they get a toehold, they can do other stuff. Now, what we're going to do today is we're going to try to steal data out of S3 buckets. So over here, I've got a bunch of S3 buckets. And by the way, you can point to fugue.co and have it point at your AWS or Azure infrastructure, and it's free forever for developers. And we will do these diagrams for you and show you what is dangerous and misconfigured and all that stuff for free. You know, obviously we ask people to pay us at scale, but if you're a developer, you can use it for free forever. So what I'm trying to do here, what an S3 bucket is a place to store data, and it is these things are massive. It's something like a fourth of the internet runs out of S3, simple storage service. But what I want to do here from EC2 is I want to get to this important records named S3 bucket and steal all of its data. And in this case, I have set up in the same account, but in the real world, it would certainly be a different account. I've set up my own bucket called all your base. And I'm going to take all the data. I'm going to try to get all the data from this one and put it into this one. Okay, so let's take a look briefly at this EC2 instance. And you can see we've got all of its configuration information here. And I mentioned before that this hack is going to involve a combination of a badly configured security group, an IAM element, and then an S3 element. So what's the badly configured security group? So here I can click on that, and you can see here this thing's firewall rule, this thing's security group is allowing SSH to world, and that should never happen and is super dangerous. But it's there, and there is a CVE on this EC2. So if you imagine back to when I was describing bad guys scanning everything automatically and knowing vulnerabilities. Well, they would have found that CVE, and they would have found it by scanning through on that port that should not be open to find that CVE. So there's lots of ways this kind of misconfiguration can happen. Very often it's something like a maintenance window, and people forget to close stuff down. All right, so in the real world, if I were hacking this, I would use an exploit. I would be able to go download one from the internet once I knew what the CVE was. So my automation would tell me, hey, we found CVE foo on this endpoint. I would go get some hacking tools for exploiting that CVE, and I would run them against that compute instance, often against something like a web server. I'm not going to do that today because I mentioned earlier, I used to work at AWS, and I know those guys, and those folks rather, and what they're constantly doing is watching for people doing stuff like that. And so if they were to notice me doing that, they might like shut down all my access, and this demo would end real fast. So instead, I'm just going to simulate that by just shelling in. So this is a secure shell, and I've got my key file here, and I'm pointed at that server here, and I'm just going to secure shell in. Okay, so the first thing to notice here is this is out of date, right? It's a perfectly good version of Linux. Amazon Linux is good, but I've been patching it, and so there are 14 packages needed for security. Well, that's where my CVE came from. So not knowing you have something running is really bad because you end up forgetting about it, and the bad guys are constantly looking for it. They're going to find it. All right, so now that I'm in here, and my font a little bit bigger, I think that's readable. I'm an experienced bad guy who steals data from the cloud, and I know I want to get into S3. So the very first thing I'm going to do is try to do an AWS command line. So AWS space S3, pointing at the S3 service. And I know on S3, the command to see what's out there is list, or ls, borrowed from Unix. And okay, well, bummer. Whoever configured this thing actually did some good stuff, right? I'm getting an access denied. Where's that coming from? That's coming from what privileges have been granted to this EC2 instance. So again, we're not talking about like usernames and passwords to databases. We're talking about this guy right here, the IAM instance profile. So again, this is identity and access management, but in this case, it is the identity of the EC2 instance. And in this case, it's something called maintenance role. But clearly maintenance role doesn't give me access to S3 because I just got an access denied. Okay, now I'm a good and clever bad guy, so I'm not gonna give up. I've got a toe hold in your infrastructure. I'm gonna start poking around. Now, I just showed you that this EC2 instance is using that maintenance role, but as the bad guy, I don't know that yet. All I know is I got in due to a CVE exploit, and I got an access denied when I wanted to list some buckets. So I'm gonna start poking around. And the first place I'm gonna go is the infamous, often maligned and misunderstood metadata service. So here the command I'm running is what's called a curl. A curl is just like getting something from the web. So just like you would type a URL into a web browser, curl does that at the command line. And here I'm not pointing at like, www.fugue.co. I'm pointing at this kind of funny IP address, 169.254.169.254. Well, what that is, from any compute instance or container running in AWS, it lives underneath the purview of what's called the hypervisor. And the hypervisor is the thing that manages all those virtual instances. And so on AWS, there's this wonderful feature, if used correctly, and often, as I said, maligned and misunderstood, particularly in the press, that can tell me what that hypervisor knows about the thing I'm in, okay? And you can see there's a bunch of kinds of data in here. Now, that's just the general listing of whatever is in that metadata service. I need to drill in a little to understand what my IAM role is. Okay, so here I'm going a little deeper. It's the same command I just ran, latest metadata, but here I'm going to drill into IAM security credentials echo. All right, well, now as a bad guy, I know what I just showed you a minute ago through Fugue. As good guys, we know is that it's running under maintenance role. And I also know that maintenance role isn't helping me much right here. But just let me show you what often gets reported on as super scary. So here I've gone from just security credentials to, now I know it's maintenance role, so I've added that. And boy, it kind of looks like I just won the lottery, right? I've got an access key, I've got a secret access key and a token. I have godlike powers now, right? No, I don't. I just have the credentials that didn't let me see S3. So this isn't that big a deal. I haven't really gotten anything that valuable because the rest of my configuration, this EC2 instance using maintenance role can't see S3. And this is a constant theme in cloud security. It's really important to understand. You need to know everything. You need to know everything about your configurations, and you need to deny knowledge to the bad guys, because that's how they get you, is by finding things that are vulnerable and exploiting them. So as a bad guy, I'm doing some discovery here. This looks super scary, but it actually doesn't help me at all. So being an experienced person who does this for a living, you know, my persona, my bad guy persona here, I'm going to switch gears completely. I'm not going to look at the metadata service. There's nothing in the metadata service that's going to help me at present. And I'm not going to look at S3 because I know I can't see it. So I'm going to change gears. Maybe I'll use the AWS command line again, but this time I'm going to look in IAM for lists, for any policies there that have something like S3 in the name. All right, well, maintenance role had the ability to do lists on IAM. And here I see this S3 read write policy. That looks pretty tasty. So what I'm going to do here is try to change the identity of that EC2 instance from the one that can't see S3 to one that can see S3. And the first step in that is to understand what are called the IAM instance profile associations. Okay, so I'll explain that. So here I typed AWS EC2 describe IAM instance profile associations. That's a mouthful. What we're talking about there is the relationship, the association between this instance profile that has the role maintenance role and this EC2 instance. So you can imagine there's a connection. You can see here in Fugue, we call these references. They're things that we're pointing to. So back over here, what I'm looking for is this guy right here, this association ID. Now I'm getting down in the weeds, but the bad guys are down in the weeds. And this is where I said earlier, you know, the press often gets it wrong and oversimplifies it. These very subtle misconfigurations can be devastating. So as a bad guy, I know I want, so you can see right here, this is pointing to a thing maintenance role, but I want to grab this association ID, and I'm going to go back over to Emacs here and modify something, because the next command is a real mouthful. So I'm not definitely going to edit it in front of you because that would be embarrassing. Okay. All right. Now this is a heck of a command, but I want you to notice that I'm using AWS EC2. Put another way, I'm calling the EC2 service. I don't need permissions for IAM or S3 or anything else to do this. I just need permissions in EC2. And I'm going to replace the IAM instance profile association of association ID that I got from right here. It's right there. And I'm going to move it to the IAM instance profile whose name is S3 read write. So I'm trying to remap that association. And that does look like victory. I now have a new association ID. My dog has come to say hi. You can go lay down, man. I'm doing something. It is now pointing to S3 read write. So I'm going to pause here and I'm going to do another background. Let's do another background. And then we'll wrap up the, okay, I'm going to choose my background before I start my video. Give me a second here.
And Josh, while you're doing that, I just want to remind everybody that if you've already guessed and won in the past, you only get one Fugue swag box per attendance. So why don't you just let someone else guess? And also, Josh, we do have some great questions too that we'll point out to you in the
Maybe
chat.
we'll do a background. Is everyone seeing my background?
Yes.
All right. You know, like last time I did one of these, it would take like a minute or, okay, that was too easy. It's Cowboy Bebop. If you've never seen Cowboy Bebop, it's absolutely awesome. If you, it's 20 years old now, holds up incredibly well. And if you're a fan of Firefly, I personally believe Firefly was heavily based on it. It's sort of like a anime space noir detective show. It's really cool. But I'm going to do one more because that was another instant one. Okay, I'm gonna
and make sure you put your answer into the all panelists and attendees. We had Ahad had put it in first, but only to all panelists, but we'll consider him the winner.
All right, this one you have to name two things since you guys are just nailing these. One is what kind of computer this is, and two, what is this application in version 1.0? And if we don't get any takers, then we'll maybe lighten it up. But that's what we're looking for. Next computer, yeah, not MATLAB.
And Manuel has already won, so I don't know.
Oh, Manuel, you got to follow the rules, man. All right, yeah, don't spoil it for anyone. That one.
Which one? They're coming through quick.
Oh, computer name in image. Is it the app or the? Well, hey, if somebody looked that closely, this is the first version of. If you've ever used one of these Python notebooks that are popular now, they're really based on this. It's a program called Mathematica. It's made by Wolfram Research, and it first came out on. Okay, next library. Yeah. Okay. No, whoever Wolfram. Oh.
Al Marcato is.
Did he already win one?
No, but does that count?
Okay. Oh yeah, yeah. I think that counts. Yeah. Yeah, Mathematica. By the way, if you've never used it, it's so cool and so much fun. And if you're a functional programmer, or let me say this: if you're not a functional programmer and you want to hack around with becoming a functional programmer, Mathematica is like a super friendly way to do it, and it's really, really cool. And it first came out on the Next Cube, I think in '88 or something, a long time ago.
I'm feeling old.
I am old, so and I'm happy about it. So, all right, we're gonna go back to some live hacking. I'm trying to keep track of time. We got 10 minutes.
Do you want to do any questions first, or do you want to just finish?
Sure. Yeah, let's do some questions. I got to switch my screens around. Go ahead and fire off questions at me.
So Sunil Adhikari asked, how long does it take to implement policy as code to a medium-sized company transitioning from on-prem to cloud infrastructure?
Okay, so there are a lot of ways that could be answered. I will tell you, to get this kind of policy as code, where we're using Open Policy Agent to look at your infrastructure and analyze it, about 15 or 30 minutes to do an entire AWS account using Fugue. That obviously is a slightly glib answer. It's absolutely true. We will do all this analysis for you and give you all this very, very quickly. But to implement it all the way through like a CI/CD pipeline or something, obviously that takes more work, but it's not as hard as you think. And we're happy to help with that. Any other questions?
Yes. Hamad Sumro asks, can you tell when you approach Cloud Center managers of misconfigurations and its risks of security risk, how do they react, positively or negatively?
It's a mix. If the engineer who was telling management that their cloud infrastructure is totally secure and there's nothing to worry about is in the room, they're usually there's usually a little bit of tension. But what I find, so that's a little bit of a joke, but I mean, I have had it happen. Most folks are very like, you know, they'll start fixing stuff while we're in the room with them. They'll, oh, wow, okay, I need to go fix that now. And that's really back to the point I made at the very beginning, which is when people get breached, I feel bad for them because they just don't know they have these exposures. And the vast majority of engineers of all varieties and non-engineers, you know, want to fix this stuff. So it's really about having the knowledge and information and then the automation to back it up.
All right.
To begin learning all this, where do I begin? If you have an AWS account, I'm just looking over here, Sylvia.
Yep.
You know, we do have an absolutely free version and all of our docs are public, and this is all we do. So, you know, I'm very familiar with our resources, but there's tons of good resources from AWS themselves and Microsoft on Azure and others out there. But feel free to reach out too. And, you know, I'm at Josh Stella on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn, although I don't check it very often. And I'm Josh at fugue.co. And I always like helping people who are getting started in this stuff.
And there was one other question that actually might be really appropriate now. Can this secret key / access key combination allow an attacker to upload to S3 via the AWS 3 SDK? If so, can't this be used to arbitrarily upload large files and drive up costs?
Yeah, it's a good question. So that depends on which IAM permissions this particular role has. So for example, I believe a well-crafted S3 role, a policy that's being used in production, should not have a combination of list, read, and write, but you often will see that, okay? So the answer is maybe. And that's another reason why this stuff is so hard, is, you know, if we have time for it, I'm happy to go to the AWS console and start spelunking IAM configuration. But Drew mentioned at the top that we're about to do some classes. Drew's calling them master classes. I don't know if I'm a master or not, but I'm the guy who's going to do them. And the first one is going to be around getting S3 configurations right. There are, I think, 5 layers of security in S3 now, and they have unusual interactions. So, and those are going to be like dynamic typing at the console, you know, chat sessions. They're going to be a whole lot of fun. So that's where I can really drill into like super details on S3 configs in particular. But right now, I want to get back to stealing some data because I want to make sure that I do get this data stolen while we're here together, or else I'm going to be an embarrassed presenter. All right, I'm going back to my first command I tried to run, right? AWS S3 list, LS. Now, if this S3 read-write role, remember I switched from maintenance role to read-write role. If that has list access to S3, I should get a list of buckets. Okay, I've got a list of buckets. Now, let's look at that important records one. Looks pretty cool, right? I said at the beginning I was going to steal out of that one. So let's take a look inside of that. So now I'm listing the contents of it. So an S3 bucket is just a logical endpoint, and it's full of objects, which are files. So in this case, it's just pictures I took on a trip in Iceland, but this might be all of your important records for your customers. Okay. The final command I'm going to run, and this is pulled verbatim out of a Department of Justice complaint against a hacker who, by the way, only ran 4 commands to drain 700 S3 buckets of all of their contents, which were very important and made a lot of news. 4 commands. The 4th one was sync. And by the way, what I'm doing here is straight from that DOJ. So first thing, you get in to a vulnerable piece of infrastructure through a misconfigured firewall or security group. Then you change the IAM role, and then you do an S3 sync. So now AWS S3 sync from S3 important records to S3 : all your base. Now, sync is not actually part of the AWS APIs. It's a utility function in the command line. But it is listed in that DOJ filing, so we absolutely know that that hacker was using the AWS command line interface. All right, I just stole all your data. And you probably don't know. Maybe ever. Well, why is that? Well, first of all, I stole the data from S3 to S3. I took it from here and I put it in here. Do you see a VPC boundary? No, the VPC boundaries are over here. Do you see any kind of network device around these? No. This is happening on the AWS command line, on the AWS command backplane, control backplane. So you're not going to see packets go across the network, no matter how many are going. The only thing you're going to have are log entries. Now you might say, well, I'll turn on CloudTrail, or I'll turn on, the S3 logging. Well, how long do those things take to report these things? CloudTrail on average, they say, expect about 15 minutes. I've seen it take more than a day. And I can do this literally in seconds, or certainly in minutes. And the reason is that you're not going to notice it in the logs, most likely, even if you have that stuff turned on. You probably won't notice it, ever, is because S3's job is to do tons and tons of GET requests in parallel at very high rates of speed. So when I take all this data that doesn't traverse your network perimeter, and you eventually get log entries, they're going, if you have even a reasonably popular application, they're just going to be one of many, 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 many requests that look exactly like this. So it's really hard to detect even after the fact. And honestly, all that would tell you is that all your data's gone. So it's much better to not have this happen to you to begin with. So that's my hack. We're coming up on time. Just a reminder, 1, we needed a misconfigured firewall. 2, we needed a vulnerable instance, an orphaned or zombie instance that is vulnerable. We got that. 3, we had to change the IAM role. And 4, we had to be able to discover those S3 buckets to steal that data. I don't have time to go through all these, but what's the most important ones? Yeah, this last one. Don't allow EC2 instances or containers to ever have IAM roles that allow or attaching or replacing role policies. We will check for that using Fugue best practices. You can use it and check it out on your own. But
Josh,
clean up your unused cloud resources.
Sorry, Josh. We do.
And do some open policy agent. I'm sorry, Sylvia, what?
My apologies. We have more time if people are willing to stay, but we did have a couple of other questions that I wanted to make sure you got to.
Hey, I'll hang around as long as people want to. Well, in that
cool.
case, let me go into a little more of this.
Okay.
A couple of the things you want to do. Use outside pen testers who can do what I just did. Don't just hire the guys, the folks that know how to do the old school data center stuff. Use automated remediation. There's a feature in Fugue that if I had it turned on would have stopped me from doing this, where when I changed that IAM role, it would have just flipped it back. And if you think about that automation of the bad guys, you got to be automated good guys. So, so that is something we're going to do. I'll leave this Q&A up for a sec and we'll do some questions and then I'll do at least one more giveaway.
Okay. So this is what do you think is the best choice? We'll see how diplomatic you are. What do you think is the best choice for cloud infrastructure, talking security between AWS and Google Cloud?
Absolutely depends on your requirements. So one of the things AWS did, which I thought was really brilliant, is they hired a guy named Steve Schmidt who ran security for IT at the FBI. And I think part of I wasn't involved in that. That's before I got there, and then I was not at the level where I would have been involved in that. But I thought this is really clever because a lot of enterprises, a lot of organizations live within the constraints of things like HIPAA or GDPR. They actually have to meet these kinds of compliance frameworks. like CIS, GDPR, HIPAA, NIST, ISO, et cetera. And one of the things that Steve and his team did is make sure that the AWS world, of resources could match these kinds of things, or SOC 2. Google's more like you should do things the Google way. Now, obviously, Google go through a lot of these themselves. But I would say that depending on your use case and your organization, you're going to have different advantages and disadvantages from any of the big cloud providers. And it's really a case-by-case basis. The other thing about AWS is the two pizza team rule, which in my experience was real and has real advantages, cause AWS to be more like a collection of little tools, like the Unix philosophy, right? Like S3's API does not look much like EC2's API. So what that means from a security perspective is you have to think about each of these services differently. When you look at like Google or Azure, they're more consistent, but they have their disadvantages as well. So that's my diplomatic answer to that. We got any other questions?
Yes, thank you for that. I think that was very diplomatic.
All right, I'm going to throw up a background while we're taking questions.
Okay. Han Yin asked if Fugue Cloud Orchestration, I think he means is Fugue Cloud Orchestration or automation plus config management.
We're really about securing your cloud. We don't build things on cloud. So what most people mean by orchestration, and I actually don't like that term for things like Terraform because I don't really think so, is provisioning. All right, you got to name the computer and the model. This should be an easy one. So what Fugue does is we will help you examine your cloud. No, Manuel, you already won. You can't say. You're right. We will examine what you've built, and we will tell you if it's vulnerable to things. And we also will give you tooling, but to check your things like your Terraform scripts. We have an open source project called Regula. You can go to github/fugue/regula, and we will examine your Terraform scripts. As I said before, that's not good enough. You should do that, but you also need to run against your dev environments, your stage, your prod environments. So we have tooling for that. So we're not really an orchestrator exactly. However, we do have this ability to do what we call baselining and baseline enforcement. So what baselining is once you have, all right, Sylvia, that was it. I think, yep, Peter for the win.
Yay.
I'll finish my answer and then I'll tell you what this computer is. So once you have your infrastructure configured what you consider properly, so Fugue will paint everything red, and we have non-visual views too, and everything's available via API. You can tell Fugue, okay, now this is good. Now this is properly configured. And once it's properly configured, you can also tell Fugue, don't let it change. And Fugue has the ability, and it's totally unique in this regard, because of our state engine and because of our sophisticated resource graph and so on and so forth, that if somebody were to do what I did and change IAM roles, we will automatically revert it to that baseline. So that is a form of orchestration, right? We are enforcing the state of the machine. And of course you can turn that off and make changes and then turn it back on again and stuff. But we're not in the market of we don't replace Terraform or CloudFormation or Ansible. We are really doing security-focused configuration, although we have very sophisticated ways to do it.
Okay.
Any more questions?
Yes, we do. Could we get one more look at the CLI, the command line screen, perhaps scrolling from top to bottom? I think I missed a few steps. Thanks for the great presentation. And that's from Jay.
Okay, cool, sure. I'll do that. But before I do that, we're going to do one more. You have to say not just what it is, but which version it is, because otherwise it's too easy. So one thing we can do, Sylvia, if you get the email, I'd be happy also to just email the commands, but I'm happy to scroll back through the CLI once somebody gets my background.
Okay. So if anybody has a CLI question, so the one that was just asked, and then there's another one from Jose Cruz. In private, please feel free to send me your email and I'll make sure I get that to Josh.
All right, Jay Eriks, the original TARDIS, season 1, Doctor Who. That is correct, sir. You get a swag pack. Okay, I'll go back over to sharing screen and I'll just roll back through everything I typed in reverse order. So first I shelled in right here. I just shelled into the box. By the way, I did not need root, if you notice. Oops. Let's see. That's where we started. So I shelled into the box. I tried to get an AWS S3 list. I couldn't. I got an access denied. I started poking around in the metadata service and I found this maintenance role. So then I switched to poking around in IAM to see if I could swap that maintenance role for something with S3 in the name. I saw this S3 read write. So I went and took a look at the EC2 IAM Instance Profile Associations and found this guy mapped to this maintenance role. And then I did this Rube Goldbergian command, AWS EC2 replace IAM Instance Profile Association with the association ID of foo to the IAM Instance Profile whose name is S3 read write. And I got back signs of victory here with the read write, and then I did that S3 LS again that I started with and got an access denied, and I got a list of all these buckets. And then I did the AWS S3 sync between 2 buckets to take all the data. Yep, just a little bit, some resources, fugue.co/go to start with developer. These are 2 open source projects we have out there for Open Policy Agent. Regula will validate Terraform scripts, and Frego, which is the Fugue Rego toolkit. Open Policy Agent's language is Rego for whatever reason. This is the Fugue Rego toolkit that helps you, is much more developer friendly. And then Open Policy Agent itself, which is the technology, open source technology that actually we've done a lot to make it work at, we're running probably close to 1 billion of these evaluations a day. So that's just stuff we've got you can leverage. And then I got a question. How did I get a PEM file that was valid for the org? Well, this was a simulation. So as I said, this EC2 instance, in the real breach, they didn't have a PEM file for SSHing in, right? They found something that had a CVE on it, and then they knocked in through the I think through the web browser, excuse me, the web server, of course, and managed to shell out from there. So in the real world, it wouldn't be like I got your PEM. That said, I have seen tons of breaches where things like login credentials were left on a EBS volume whose snapshots were not encrypted and were left in public, and people go mount it to something, an EBS volume's like a virtual disk, enterprise block store, and poke around and find some creds and just start using them on stuff. So, I mean, there's lots of ways to get it wrong. Do we have any other?
Oh yeah, yes we do. So okay. Tom Zedul asked, couldn't you catch that in CloudTrail? And I think he was referring to something quite a bit ago. So I wasn't sure what exactly he's referring to. I don't know if you recall what that might have been about, Josh.
So what CloudTrail is going to do, the short answer for everything I just did is maybe, but only after everything has been taken from you. So it's one, would the data be in CloudTrail eventually that I had done something like change the IAM role association? Yes, it would. CloudTrail takes, if you ask AWS, they'll say, well, you should plan on taking about 15 minutes. That's optimistic. I have seen CloudTrail go for a day before reporting something, and it can happen. Now, if I weren't explaining this along the way, I would have stolen all that data in less than 15 minutes. So yeah, CloudTrail may, if you are really using it aggressively and know exactly what to look for. CloudTrail is basically just a big list. It's the log file, essentially. It's a queue of everything that ever happened, but it doesn't have the state awareness of a resource graph like Fugue does. So Fugue knows, I don't know if it's this environment. Let's see if Fugue noticed that. Oh, it did. Okay, so this is Fugue noticing, oh, this is me fixing the infrastructure earlier today before I ran this demo. So here's Fugue noticing that this EC2 instance had its IAM instance profile change from this state to this state. This is me going from the S3 rewrite back to the maintenance rule because I did that earlier today. So because Fugue has this known like graph of everything, we have this baseline concept that's not in CloudTrail, it's not in any of that stuff. We know the complete configurations of this entire graph, which is why we can show you, we can do automated diagramming and analysis of compliance and all that stuff. We can detect this stuff and know in context what it means.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yes, there is. So well, there's two questions left, and I think we'll leave it at that. Who would you recommend at pen tester for cloud misconfiguration / IBM? That's from Debbie.
I don't feel comfortable recommending a particular company. And the reason I say that is you're going to get a ton of variability even within pen testers for expertise on the individual team basis for this stuff. So, we use a combination of like auditors and pen testers, and also I think I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's one of these services where you put out bounties and you set caps on like how much you're willing to spend, and we just have kind of like the whole networks of whoever wants to come in and try to make some money from Fugue by telling us where we're wrong, do pen tests against our not our production environment, although we do some of that but in a more controlled way. So I'm hesitant to throw out a name. But if you reach out to me, I'd be happy to engage in a dialogue about how we think about it and how I'd recommend making a selection.
Okay, and one of the final questions, we're down to two, is all your base S3 buckets set up outside of the organization's network? I'm new to AWS. So if I am following the AWS CLI has access to those 6 servers and you are simply copying over the data.
All right, there's a fair amount to unpack there. And I don't know that I've got time to do it in great detail. I will say this. It is possible, and this will be part of that masterclass that Drew was talking about, the class we're going to give that's going to start with S3. So you see this thing right here is called a VPC endpoint, okay? A VPC is a virtual private cloud network. Some services in AWS live inside of VPC networks, things like Lambdas, EC2 instances, containers, etc. Some things live outside of them. They aren't constrained by like the subnet mappings and routing tables of a VPC network. But you can configure them through one of these VPC endpoints, and you can tell, yeah, exactly. S3 is a global service. That's why somebody answered. That's right. S3 is like public internet. However, and I will go over this in that masterclass, I could have configured this S3 bucket to only be able to talk to things through particular endpoints through what's called the S3 bucket policy, which is one of the 5 layers of S3 security. So it gets a little complex.
And then if there are any questions that you have left here that we haven't been able to get to because of time, I'll take a snapshot of this chat, or you can email me or Josh. Josh is josh@fugue.co. I am Sivia@fugue.co. and we will answer your questions because it's now about 20 minutes after the hour. The last question that I do want to ask you is, can't you just teach a class, is what someone asked. I think that was Tom Zadul. So anyway.
Well, it's funny you ask
There's
because that's what we're going to be doing, for better or worse. You know, if you're in this field and you've just worked on this for a very long time in this particular field, I'm just going to try to pull up one more here. All right. You know, if you're honest, you're very aware that you don't know everything, but we can share a lot, and we do know a fair amount. I have spent a significant portion of my life just working on this. By the way, if anyone guesses this one, we'll do another swag pack. Sorry, Sylvia. But yeah, we're gonna start doing classes and see what people think of them. And you know, a lot of folks are quarantined and a little bored, but you know, join us. It's gonna be free. So.
Yep. There you go. Drew, I'm going to toss it over to you for the wrap up.
Thank you, Sylvia, and thanks, Josh. Again, really appreciate all of you having us out. This was super fun, and hope to be back. I know Josh has a bunch of other sort of scenarios up his sleeve that he could show if we want to come back at some point in the future. But otherwise, again, I know we've been kind of hitting on this masterclass, but we think it's going to be fun. It'll be a lot like this, really interactive, hands-on the console, CLI, etc. So do come out, check it out. Obviously, check out Fugue Developer. 15 minutes, you're up and running. So it's pretty rad. I guess that's all I've got.
And nobody's guessing, Josh, except Manuel is chomping at the bit.
Oh, I didn't.
Hey, go for it, man. Nobody's guessing. Ah, yes, indeed. It is the orbital ion cannon from Akira. man. Well, we gotta meet sometime. I feel like we enjoy the same things. All right. Well, everyone. Yeah, Manuel is taking it all. All right, cool. Well, this was a great time, and thank you so much for attending. We'll be doing more of these, and come join us for the class. One person said, what's the minimum skill level for the class? None. If you can use the AWS console, most of the class is going to be taught in the console, and what we're going to do is kind of like I did here today, but even at a much more detailed, granular level, walk you through how to think about this and how to do it. So, so I hope it's valuable to people of all skill levels.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. You know, a lot of, I guess, you know, sessions or tutorials online are very prescriptive for, you know, very specific use cases. And I think what we want to accomplish with the master class is to help everybody understand the concepts around the different, you know, security layers for specific AWS services and use cases, so you can think critically about how to secure your specific use case, because there's no real one size fits all in the cloud. I think that's what makes the cloud so powerful, is that it can be used in so many different ways, but that makes security a little bit more of a challenge. So.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you. You're all awesome, and we look forward to hearing from you all again. Take care, and we are over and out.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.